Welcome to A Story in History. This isn't just another history lesson, it's a journey into the heart of God's grand design, where the Bible's timeless truths collide with the extraordinary events that shaped our world. From the wonders of creation and the power of the flood to the awe-inspiring tales of Moses, David, and Jesus, your hosts, Dwayne and Cheryl, will take you on a thrilling exploration of God's unfolding plan for humanity. With a passion for storytelling and a knack for uncovering deep insights, they bring history to life like never before. Prepare to be amazed as we unravel the mysteries of Scripture, connect the dots of history, and discover how it all points to one ultimate truth. This is a story, written in the pages of history for all to see. So grab your coffee, your Bible, and your curiosity, because his story in history is about to begin.
Hello, welcome back to His Story in History. We're finally off to session 2, where we're going to look at Genesis. So before we jump into creation, which is going to be a really good episode, we're just going to give you a brief overview of Genesis. So the first thing we're going to look at is what actually happens in Genesis. So Genesis is pretty much divided into 2 sections. So we have what's called primeval history, or the antediluvian period. Now, antediluvian is just a really fancy word for pre-flood, but it's this whole pre-flood period, and that covers basically chapters 1 through 11. So 1 through 11, we're going to be talking about creation, the fall of man. It also discusses early humanity. In there, we're going to talk a little about the book of Enoch, and Job has some references that are found in Enoch as well. Noah and the flood in the first part, and then we'll look at the establishment of languages and nations, which includes the Tower of Babel. And then after that, we're getting into the second part of Genesis, which is where all the patriarchs come in. So we know our patriarchs.
Knowing the flood's going to be a good one. I think we should spend some time on that one.
Yeah. So with our patriarchs, we have chapters 12 to 50, which is, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Genesis ends us off with the death of Joseph. So the next question, where does Genesis take place? Well, you'll see here's a map of the Middle East as the nations are currently laid out, even though these borders are constantly changing. We'll start off the book of Genesis. It's southern Iraq. See down there, that body of water, it's not labeled. That's the Persian Gulf. And you see these rivers coming up, the Tigris, the Euphrates. Genesis mentions these rivers. So this is where we're going to start our story with the Garden of Eden. And when we get to Noah, I don't believe the Bible tells us kind of where Noah lived or where the ark took off, but we do know that he landed up in Turkey. So there is evidence that the ark is up in that place. And the rest of Genesis will pretty much take place in this area. It's kind of a U shape called the Fertile Crescent. So we might refer to the Fertile Crescent a lot in this series. And the reason why it's Fertile Crescent is exactly what the name implies. It's very fertile and it's a good place to live. And it's in this second, okay. And it's in the shape of a crescent. I'm old, you gotta let me finish my thought. Or it's gonna go poo. Anyway, and it's the shape of a crescent, and that's why. So at the bottom, just west of the Persian Gulf, you'll see this town called Ur, in the land of Sumer. They were Sumerians, and that is where Abraham's story starts. Okay, go.
So go back to the next slide there, where it talks about the Garden of Eden. The previous? Yeah. Because I've got a question. Here's an interesting. Okay, so what we're looking at, presumably, Cheryl, is the current map, right? Like we're talking about ancient times, but you're showing us a current map of the world, correct?
Yes.
So here we see the Tigris and the Euphrates and so forth listed here on this particular map, but then there was a flood, which affected, it affected the globe. Right?
The topography is what you mean.
The topography, it affected, the continents broke apart, and so forth. So here's the question. uh, you're going to get into this, but Moses is the one that's giving us this account of Genesis. So when he makes reference to the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the three rivers, is he talking about, is he saying this is where, where these rivers are now today, this is where the garden was? Or was he saying, you see where I'm going? Or is he saying, yeah, that nothing changed, right? The garden's in the same place. Or is he looking back and saying, we have the Tigris, the Euphrates, and I can't remember what the other one is. What's it called? The Tigris?
Well, the Tigris, Euphrates, and there's two other ones.
Yeah.
I think I know what they are, but I'm not going to guess.
Yeah. We'll list them down in the videos, but we are getting old. But you understand the question?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, like right now, based on what the Bible says where the Garden of Eden is, the most likely spot is exactly where we're showing, at the southern part of Iraq, where the Persian Gulf comes in, but it could have been somewhere else because the flood definitely changed everything. But how about we look into this a little bit more, and we'll deal with this when we get to the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a good plan. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a really, really good point there. So let's look into that a little bit more.
Sounds good.
Okay, so what time period does Genesis cover?
Are you asking me?
Well, what? Okay, let's back up. What do you think? What are the dates?
You keep going, babe. Keep going.
Well, it covers a lot. It covers a huge time period, and we're actually going to spend a lot of time in Genesis because it covers, what do we say here? More than 2,000 years. So, because Joseph was about 1800. So yeah, so from 4,000 approximately up to about approximately 1700. So, and you can see in this little chart that I made here, what I did was I have my timeline anchors. So refer back to our video about dating and timelines. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But what I did is I put all the books of the Bible, the books of the Old Testament in this chart, just to kind of, for myself, to kind of see how all the books happen chronologically. So, you can see Genesis covers a huge time period. And then from Moses and the Judges, that's about 500 years. The whole Divided Kingdom episodes are 500 years. And then the Temple rebuilt, we have at 500 BC, we have a few prophets there. So this is covering a huge chunk of time, and a chunk of time that we probably have the least amount of evidence for. So I don't know, Dwayne, if you have anything to say about this?
About what specifically? Sorry.
Well, there's just this timeline, like you see in gray.
Nope.
Where I have the book of Enoch. That's where we're assuming that it fits. The book of Job, it doesn't really say. People assume he was during the time of Abraham. And then you see Ruth in the gray. Again, it doesn't say when, but we know from the context of the book that it happened then. And then again, like Jonah, for instance, that's a separate book. And we know what happened. He was a prophet to Assyria, and then Esther, of course, when they were in exile. So,
right. Well, with regard to the timelining of Job, there are different theories. There's about 4 different theories as to when Job existed, and so the first theory, Cheryl, has it right where you have it, 2000 to 1500 BC, sometime in there. And the reason why is because they say it's similar to like when you read Job, you kind of get the feeling that the setting is very similar to Abraham. That Job is very much like an Abraham kind of guy. So it's similar to the lifestyle, family priesthood, long lifespan, and no mention of the Levitic, the Mosaic or the Levitic law. So that's one of the arguments. Then the second place that people say that Job was 1500 to 1200 BC, Cheryl, and that's
really
yeah, And the arguments are
Okay.
because of linguistic evidence. Job's location, Uz, could be tied to Edom and Midian. So then and then there's a third timing, and that's 900 to 600 BC.
What?
You don't even have in your chart here. And they say that the reason why is because what's found in Job is very similar to wisdom literature, like in, for instance, Proverbs and Ecclesiastics. And there's some, deep theological discussion. And then, of course, there's always people that just say, no, he didn't even exist. And so they just basically say that that he wasn't a historical figure, and that Job, they look at Job as a tale of wisdom, because there's no genealogies, there's no literary parallels to any other ancient text. So that's their argument. But I believe, doesn't Jesus mention Job?
Now you're putting me on the spot.
I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. But I'm pretty sure Jesus mentions Job and considers him as a literary figure. But I can figure that out.
Well, we could do a deep dive into Job as a separate topic.
Yeah, because I could probably figure that out later on. Okay, you want to keep going?
Okay. So the next question: who wrote Genesis and when? Who do you think wrote Genesis?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I think Moses wrote it.
So there's two basic different theories about who wrote it. The one is a traditional view, like Dwayne said, the Mosaic authorship. And this view holds that Moses wrote it, and he also wrote the rest of the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. And he wrote this during their journey in the desert. So that would be around the 15th to 13th centuries. There is another theory, and that's why I have it highlighted. It is a theory that's very popular, and it suggests that Genesis was written by multiple authors or groups of authors over time. So then the texts were eventually compiled, edited into their current form. And these sources are believed to have been written between the 10th and 6th century BC, and then later compiled around the 5th century BC. So those are kind of your two popular opinions about who wrote it.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to move forward with the assumption that Moses actually did write the Bible. And
yay, I won.
Like I said, Genesis is only one of the 5. I mean, and Genesis is humongous with 50 chapters covering a huge time span. So how did Moses know what to write? He wasn't alive then. So there's one option, and this is actually one that I have heard before, was people just believe that God downloaded the content to Moses. God told Moses what happened in the beginning and about all the stories and the journeys of the patriarchs, and so he just wrote it down, similar to how the 10 Commandments were written. God spoke and Moses wrote it all down. The other option, which is very popular with critics, is that he was familiar with different myths and traditions during his time period, and he basically kind of what we call Christianized the current understanding of the world. So he took pagan traditions and just kind of used them as a backdrop to explain the one true God. So, and they say this is why we have similar stories from around the world. So they're basically saying that Moses took from all of these stories because they're so similar and kind of made it unique. So, but how do I think he knew what to write? I think it's because of oral tradition. When you want to explain a little bit about what we mean by oral tradition?
Well, unlike today, and I've mentioned this before in our going through the Gospel of Mark, because the Gospels were orally transmitted at first too. Today, it seems like that doesn't seem like a very valid form of the transmission of information. But that's because we're superimposing a modern standard over an ancient world. But in the ancient world, oral transmission was everywhere and almost in every culture, and it was taken very seriously. In fact, many times there were people given specifically to the task of learning the oral tradition of their tribe, of their people group or family or whatever. In fact, if I can just make a little bit of an illustration, do you remember the movie that they came out in? It was called Roots. I think it was Roots 2.
Yeah.
Do you remember, by Alex Haley? And remember, remember Alex Haley ends up finding the place allegedly where, his people came from, and they found the storyteller. And he basically sat down with the storyteller and basically said, tell me about, so he wanted to know about a specific thing. So the storyteller sat down and started at the very beginning. And he was like, no, just skip ahead to the part where, and he was like, no, that's not the way this works. And my illustration is that there were people that were dedicated to memorizing the transmission of these stories. That's what they had. And so, and they would memorize it exactly as it was told to them.
Yeah.
And they couldn't modify it. That wasn't their job. Their sole responsibility was to transmit orally the tradition that has been handed down to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it'd be kind of like if you were asked to quote a song, it's really hard to kind of jump in the middle and quote it from there. But if you start from the beginning, it's like triggers your memory, so you can record the whole thing. So, yeah, we got a lot of background noises in this one.
That's 15 minutes, by the way.
Okay. So, well, let's finish with oral tradition, and then we'll pause for covenants.
Okay.
Okay, so like Dwayne was saying, oral tradition is actually very popular. A lot of societies do it. It's very reliable. But there are a couple potential problems. One is potential for inaccuracies, so they can be altered over time through retelling, with details being added, removed, or modified unintentionally due to human memory limitations. This is a criticism of it. I don't think it's a really strong criticism, to be honest. So if one of the things is when you think about the amount of time that people spent around campfires, the amount of time they spent traveling, you think of the Hebrew people and all the miles that they walked together. I mean, this is what they did for entertainment. All the generations walking together, telling the same stories over and over and over again, whether you wanted to hear them or not. And then the importance of context. So understanding the cultural context and oral tradition is crucial to interpreting its meaning and potential historical accuracy. We talked about this in the first sessions that we did about cultural context. And then in some societies, oral traditions are maintained through a collective memory system. This is what Dwayne was talking about. There's certain individuals that are responsible for it. And then this is, again, what we talked about in the first part with synchronism. So to assess the reliability of oral tradition, historians often try to verify against other sources, like archaeological evidence or written records. So, but Moses was the 25th generation from Adam. How accurate could that oral tradition have been 25 generations later? Well, let's just take a look at this picture. So here is Adam at the top. And you see 25 generations down at the bottom is Moses. Now, these lines are their lifespans. So you can see Adam, see how when it comes to the end, if you go straight down, Adam was still alive when all of these other sons were living. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 generations between Adam and Methuselah. But Methuselah actually would have gotten the information straight from Adam. I just think that's so cool. And if you look at Methuselah's life, this is Shem's great-grandfather, and Shem was the son of Noah. So Shem would have been alive during Methuselah's lifetime, pre-flood. So Shem and Methuselah both had a really good idea of what the pre-flood world looked like and what happened during the flood and right after the flood. So now we're looking at Shem, and if you look at how long he lived, he was actually alive when Isaac was living. So Isaac supposedly could have got this oral tradition straight from Shem as well. And then you see Levi, and then to Amram, and then to Moses. So what does this mean? So there's actually, from when Moses was born, he was only 3 generations from the account of Abraham, 4 generations from the accounts of Noah and the flood, and then 6 generations from the account of creation. So I think it's a pretty accurate account. Okay,
that's really good. That's really good.
So finally, just to answer this last question, so how did Moses know what to write down? Option 1, you can still believe God just downloaded it to him and he wrote it. Option 2, that he did borrow myths and traditions of his day and kind of made it Jewish. Or option 3, which is what we tend to lean towards, is that the story of how God created the flood, the patriarchs, etc., were passed down from generation to generation, starting with Adam. And as the generations dispersed, and we're actually going to talk about this when we talk about Noah, time passed, the truth actually, it could have got distorted and became intermingled with current worldviews. So, which example, there's multiple creation and flood accounts all around the world, which we will talk about later. So, that's it for this section, and we are going to jump right into another section here called Covenants.
All right, we'll see you in part 2.